This is a normal Viking raid and a strategy of war. Now compare that to the Mongol strategies of war. There's a secret behind why Viking raids seemed so random, and why the Mongols spared some cities, while erasing others. They weren't mindless brutes. Both used logic for their attacks, but not always. And don't think for a second they only relied on brute force to win battles. They had a secret strategy of war that cost them basically nothing to implement, but more on that later. Let's discuss it in today's episode of Light's History. Viking raids weren't just chaos, and Mongol conquests weren't always total destruction. There was a reason why some cities burned, while others were spared. A terrifying reason. You see, both the Vikings and the Mongols had a hidden war strategy that didn't rely on brute strength, but on fear. And that's because of one very simple reason. That reason is because they weren't just warriors. They were engineers of terror. One built legends, the other built the biggest land empire in history, and left mountains of skulls along the way. However, only one of them reached North America, and only one connected Europe to China and rewrote the rules of global trade. So who really shaped the world more? And here's the uncomfortable question. Would you rather face 10,000 mounted Mongol archers or wake up to a Viking longship on your shore at dawn? The answer is not as simple as you think. Chapter 1: Sowing Fear. Imagine waking up in a quiet English monastery in the year 793, only to hear screaming. Out of the fog comes a Viking longship. No warning, no mercy. That was Lindisfarne, and it wasn't just a robbery. It was a message. We're here, we don't care, and we'll be back. That one raid kicked off what's now called the Viking Age, around 300 years of coastal terror from Norway to North Africa. These weren't just random barbarians. They raided Paris 3 times and even sailed all the way to Baghdad. Seriously, the Vikings made it to Canada before Columbus was even born. Now let's travel to the 1200s. The Mongols show up, and when they arrive, they don't raid. They erase. Entire cities like Nishapur, gone. Over 100,000 people reportedly slaughtered in days. The Mongols didn't just want gold, they wanted control. Between year 1206 and 1279, they conquered more land than the Romans did in centuries, from Korea to Poland. At one point, the Mongol Empire covered over 9 million square miles. So what's more terrifying? A band of berserkers crashing through your church doors at dawn, or a thundering horde that wipes your entire city off the map? Before we move on to the next section, please don't forget to subscribe if you liked the video so far. Chapter 2: Psychological Warfare. If fear was a weapon, both the Vikings and Mongols wielded it like pros, not just to win, but to paralyze their enemies before the first blow was even struck. They both knew that there's nothing more important than the shadow of fear cast over a people. Heck, Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones used a single song to intimidate his enemies. In other words, why would you show your enemy how ruthless you are in battle, when the shadow of fear can do the exact same thing? And the Vikings knew this perfectly. Imagine you're a monk in coastal Ireland. It's still dark and you hear the horns. Before you can say amen, there's fire, screaming, and steel. It wasn't just loot, it was terror as a tactic. And it worked. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says Viking raids brought havoc among the people. Some stories even mention the blood eagle, a supposed execution method where ribs were split and lungs pulled out like wings. Whether that actually happened is debated, but the fear, oh, that was very real. Now the Mongols, they didn't sneak in, they announced their terror. Genghis Khan once said, "The greatest joy is to conquer your enemies and to hear the lamentation of their women." Cities like Merv were wiped out with up to 700,000 people killed in one siege. So were Viking raids just chaos? Or were they calculated dread? And how did the Mongols turn panic into a perfectly planned weapon? Stick around, we're just getting started. Chapter 3: Lightning Across Continents. The Vikings moved like ghosts on water, From the late 700s to around 1100 AD, they launched raids, built kingdoms, and settled far beyond Scandinavia. England raided. Ireland pillaged. France, they were given Normandy just to get them to stop. They even sailed to what's now Russia and set up trade routes to the Middle East. Oh, and before Columbus ever touched the New World, Leif Erikson was chilling in Vinland, modern-day Canada, around the year 1000 AD. That's nearly 400 years of seaborne expansion. But then, the Mongols arrived like a thunderclap. Starting in 1206, Genghis Khan united a bunch of steppe tribes and, in just 70 years, his descendants ruled the largest land empire in human history, about 9.2 million square miles. That's more than twice the size of the Roman Empire at its peak. They conquered China, Persia, and Eastern Europe with armies that traveled up to 100 miles a day on horseback. That's basically medieval blitzkrieg. So, who had more staying power, the long-haul Vikings or the fast-burning Mongols? And did the ocean raiders or the steppe warriors have a clearer strategy behind their chaos? Chapter 4. Chaos or Control. Let's get one thing straight. Both the Vikings and the Mongols could ruin your day. But how they fought was like comparing a bar fight to a military-grade drone strike. The Vikings thrived on chaos. Picture a swarm of axe-wielding warriors jumping off long ships at dawn, screaming like banshees and swinging for gold and glory. Their style was fast, brutal, and unpredictable. No centralized army, just independent warbands led by jarls who made decisions based on gut and opportunity. That's how they took cities like York and even besieged Paris in 845 AD with just 120 ships and maybe 5,000 men. Now enter the Mongols. These guys were terrifying because they didn't just show up, they planned. Genghis Khan built a military system where every 10 soldiers had a commander, all the way up to divisions of 10,000. They used scouts, spies, and even signal flags to coordinate strikes across hundreds of miles. They faked retreats to lure enemies out of cities, then circled back and crushed them. And thanks to their horses, each rider had 3 to 5 spares. They could move faster than any medieval army on Earth. At the Battle of Kalka River in 1223, a Mongol force of maybe 20,000 annihilated a Slavic army more than twice their size using pure tactics. So ask yourself this, what's scarier? A screaming Viking jumping through your door, or a perfectly timed Mongol ambush you didn't even see coming? Chapter 5. Weapons of Mass Destruction. The Vikings weren't just swinging sticks around. They had hand-forged iron swords, heavy bearded axes, and those iconic round shields made of wood, leather, and iron. A good Viking sword like the Ulfberht could slice through bone, and was so well made, people thought it was magic. And then there were the berserkers, warriors who supposedly fought in a trance-like fury, shirtless, howling, and maybe high on mushrooms. Yeah, those mushrooms. Whether fact or legend, it made enemies think twice before fighting them. But if the Vikings were brawlers, the Mongols were snipers on horseback. Their composite bow was a medieval superweapon, small, curved, made of wood, sinew, and horn, and could fire arrows up to 300 yards. And they didn't shoot just one. A trained Mongol archer could fire 6 arrows a minute while riding at full gallop. Add in lamellar armor, steel helmets, and stirrups that let them shoot while standing in the saddle, and you've got a cavalry unit that could take down knights before they even got close. So, what's worse? Getting your door kicked in by a guy with an axe, or being turned into a pincushion from 200 yards by someone you never saw coming? Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. Chapter 6. Legacy of Destruction. The Vikings and the Mongols weren't just swinging swords and conquering cities. They were driven by belief systems that shaped how they fought and how they're remembered today. For the Vikings, it was all about glory, die in battle, and you didn't just go to the afterlife, you went to Valhalla, where you'd fight all day and feast all night. That belief made them fearless. Why retreat when death was a promotion? But they weren't just bloodthirsty raiders. They had gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, and as they settled in Europe, many eventually converted to Christianity. You go from axe-wielding pagans to church-building kings in just a few generations. The Mongols, totally different. Their belief wasn't in one god, but in one ruler, the Khan. Genghis Khan believed he was chosen by heaven, literally. And while the Mongols were surprisingly tolerant of religions, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, take your pick, they had zero tolerance for disobedience. If a city resisted, it vanished. But if you submitted, you might actually thrive. They weren't killing for chaos. They were building an empire with a mission. Trade routes like the Silk Road flourished under their rule, and they linked China to Europe, spreading everything from gunpowder to ideas. And here's the twist. Both of these brutal warrior cultures helped shape the modern world. The Vikings gave us names like Normandy, from Northmen, words like berserk and Thursday, Thor's Day, and even laid the foundations for modern Russia through Norse Slavic rulers, like Rurik. Meanwhile, the Mongols created the conditions for globalization before globalization was a thing. They standardized weights, protected merchants, and even had a postal system across 9.2 million square miles. So who left the deeper scar? The axe-swinging pagans turned settlers, or the empire that built bridges with one hand and burned cities with the other? But what if you were a townsman in the year 1200? Which name would send more fear down your spine? Ragnar or Genghis? Let us know in the comments below. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Bye for now.